I heard a scream before I saw the light. My little girl was standing on the front lawn, her school bag still on, eyes full of fear. Right in front of her stood Karen, the HOA leader, holding a taser that sparked with electricity. Her face was red with anger. "She broke the rule again," Karen yelled. "She needs to be taught a lesson." My daughter cried and held her arm, scared and shaking. My wife ran to help, shouting for Karen to stop, but Karen didn't listen. She raised the taser again, sparks flying. That's when I came outside. I saw everything. Karen thought she was strong, that she could scare anyone she wanted, but she didn't know the truth. The girl she attacked is the daughter of a Navy SEAL. Before you hear what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to follow for more real HOA stories where justice always wins. I heard the scream before I saw the light. It was sharp, quick, and high. The kind of sound that makes your blood run cold before your mind even understands what's happening. My heart jumped, my feet moved on their own, and I was already halfway to the front door before I even knew what I was doing. The second I stepped outside, I saw her, my little girl, standing on the front lawn. Her pink school bag still on one shoulder, one of the straps slipping down her arm, her small hands frozen in front of her, palms open, eyes wide and terrified. And right there in front of her stood Karen, the HOA president, the queen of every complaint, the woman who thought her clipboard gave her power over everyone in the neighborhood. She was holding something in her hand, a small black taser that sparked with bright blue light. Every spark lit up her face, making her look like she was enjoying every second of this. "She broke the rule again," Karen yelled, her voice filled with rage. "You people never listen. You think the rules don't apply to you." The crackling of the taser was louder than her words, the sound of electricity snapping through the air. My daughter's lip trembled, her chin shaking as she tried to speak but couldn't. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She took a small step back, clutching her school bag against her chest like it could protect her. "She didn't do anything," my wife shouted from the porch. Her voice shook, but she still stood tall. Karen didn't even look at her. Her eyes were locked on my little girl, and her smile was thin and cruel. She took a step forward, her heels digging into the grass, her arm rising slowly. "Rules are rules," she said. "She'll learn today." The next second felt longer than a minute. The taser sparked again, brighter this time, and my little girl screamed. The sound tore right through me. She stumbled backward, her knees buckling. My wife ran toward her, screaming for Karen to stop, but Karen didn't stop. She laughed. She actually laughed. A short, bitter laugh that sounded like victory. My wife reached my daughter, grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her close. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," she whispered, though her voice was breaking. And that's when I moved. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just reacted. Years of training kicked in before thought did. My feet pounded against the concrete. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and every breath was sharp and focused. Karen turned when she heard me coming. For the first time, the fake power on her face faded. Her smile vanished. She blinked, confused, maybe even scared for a second. The taser was still crackling in her hand, but her grip loosened. "Put it down," I said, my voice low, calm, and controlled, even though inside I was shaking with fury. Karen's voice came out uneven, but she tried to sound strong. "She broke the rule. She can't be out here. This is a violation." Her tone cracked on the last word. I took another step closer. "Put it down," I said again, this time quieter. My wife looked at me, still holding our daughter tight against her chest. I could see the small red mark on my little girl's arm, just above her elbow. It wasn't deep, but it was enough. Enough to make my vision blur for a second. Karen tried to laugh, tried to act like she wasn't afraid, but her hand shook. "I can't believe this." "You people think you're special," she said. "You think you're above the law." I stared right into her eyes. "The law?" I said slowly. "You just attacked a child, Karen." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a second she looked around. The neighbors had started coming out. People were on their porches, holding their phones, recording. The quiet suburban street that she controlled with fear now watched her in silence. She turned back to me, breathing fast. "This is harassment," she snapped. "You can't talk to me like this." I took another step closer until I was standing only a few feet away. You made one mistake, Karen, I said. You thought you could use fear to control people, but you didn't know who you were dealing with. She tilted her head slightly, trying to keep her voice steady. And who exactly am I dealing with? She asked. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. You attacked the daughter of a Navy SEAL. The words hit her harder than any punch could have. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but she said nothing. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have a single word to hide behind. Her shoulders dropped slightly. The taser slipped from her fingers and hit the grass with a dull thud. She tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. The neighbors were still watching. My wife was still holding our daughter, and I was standing right there, calm, still, and waiting. Karen's voice broke. I didn't mean... I was just trying to teach her, she stammered. Teach her what? I interrupted. That you can hurt people because you have power? She froze. You think rules give you the right to scare a child? The silence that followed was heavy. Only the soft whimper of my daughter and the faint hum of the taser, still buzzing on the ground, filled the air. I crouched down beside my little girl. You're okay, I said softly. She nodded weakly, her small hands gripping mine. It hurt, she whispered. My chest tightened. I know, baby, I know. I stood up and turned back toward Karen. She was shaking now, her arms crossed, trying to look composed but failing. The red in her face had turned pale. You should go inside, I said to my wife. Call the police. Karen's head jerked up. Police? You're calling the police? I didn't answer. My wife ran toward the house carrying our daughter, and I stayed where I was. I looked at Karen one last time. You think fear keeps people in line, I said, but fear can also destroy you. She didn't move. She just stood there staring at the ground, mumbling something about misunderstanding, about rules, about how she didn't mean to hurt anyone. But it was too late. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, echoing through the neighborhood. The same neighborhood she had ruled with fear was about to watch her lose everything. I took a slow breath and looked up at the sky. The air smelled like ozone and rain. The blue sparks from the taser had stopped, leaving only the faint smell of burned grass. My hands were steady, but my heart still pounded. Karen looked up at me one last time, her voice quiet and broken. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know who you were. I met her eyes and said, now you do. It didn't start that day. It started months before. Small things at first, little problems that didn't seem important at the time. Karen had been a problem since the day we moved in. The very first morning, she showed up at our door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, holding a clipboard thick with rules. She handed it to my wife and said, welcome to the neighborhood. Please make sure you follow all regulations. We take standards very seriously here. My wife nodded politely, even though she already looked uncomfortable. Karen's eyes scanned our front porch, the grass, the color of the door. Her expression tightened. That shade of blue, she said, pointing to our door, is not HOA approved. You'll need to change it by the end of the week. I remember thinking she couldn't be serious, but she was. That was only the beginning. A few days later, we got our first warning letter. Apparently, our trash bins were visible from the street. I had left them out the night before collection. A $50 fine, just like that. I paid it quietly, told myself it wasn't worth the argument. But then came another letter. The grass was 1 inch too long. Another fine. Then another, this time for having my daughter's toys in the yard. A pink ball, a small plastic chair, and her bicycle leaning against the fence. Karen's note said it made the property look cluttered. My wife started to get upset. She's targeting us, she said one evening, holding the letter in her shaking hands. I told her to stay calm. We'll handle it, I said. We've dealt with worse. I wanted to believe that was true. Karen seemed to take joy in finding problems. Every time we fixed one thing, she'd find another. One afternoon, she stopped my wife outside and complained that our daughter's laughter was too loud. Too loud. My wife was stunned into silence. She's a child, she said softly. Karen shrugged and said, rules about noise apply to everyone. Then she walked away like she'd done something noble. That night, my daughter sat at the dinner table, quiet and thoughtful. Daddy, she asked, why does that lady hate me? I didn't know what to say. I forced a smile and told her, some people don't understand kindness. She nodded, but I could see the confusion and sadness in her eyes. The next week, Karen sent an email to all the neighbors announcing a new rule. No kids playing outside after 6 p.m. She said it was because of noise concerns, but everyone knew it was about us. The neighborhood was silent that night, like everyone was afraid to step outside. My daughter stared out the window at her pink ball sitting in the yard. The sun was still up. "Can I go play, Daddy?" she asked. I looked at the clock. It was 6:05. I didn't answer right away. My wife shook her head and said quietly, "Not tonight, sweetheart." My daughter nodded, picked up her stuffed bear, and went to her room. I sat there, staring at the rule sheet on the table, feeling something inside me twist. Over the next few weeks, Karen's presence grew stronger. She would walk past our house 3 or 4 times a day, always with her clipboard, always watching. If we so much as left a chair out on the porch overnight, there'd be a notice the next morning. Sometimes she'd take pictures, pretending she was documenting violations. I caught her once, standing in our yard, holding her phone up. "Excuse me," I said sharply, stepping outside. She didn't flinch. "I'm just checking property compliance," she said. "It's my job." I told her to get off my property. She smiled, like she'd won something. "Touchy," she said, walking away slowly, her heels clicking against the sidewalk. My wife wanted to report her, but I told her not to. "The best way to beat people like her," I said, "is to stay calm. Let her dig her own hole." But deep down, I knew calm only worked if both sides had limits. Karen didn't. Her limits ended where her control began. The more we ignored her, the bolder she got. She started making snide comments whenever she saw my wife. "Still haven't changed that door color, I see. Or maybe if you spent less time outside, your child would behave better." My wife tried to stay polite, but I could see the toll it was taking. She'd come inside shaking, pretending she was fine, but her hands always gave her away. Then one day, I came home to find my daughter crying in the living room. Her little hands covered her ears, her face buried in her knees. My wife was sitting next to her, angry and pale. Karen yelled at her, she said. She told her she couldn't ride her bike in the driveway. She called her a rule breaker. I knelt down next to my daughter and gently lifted her chin. "Hey," I said softly, "look at me. You didn't do anything wrong." She sniffled and said, "That lady hates me, Daddy." I hugged her tightly. "Don't worry," I said, "I'll take care of it." That night, I walked down the street to Karen's house. The lights were on, her perfect garden glowing under the porch lamps. She opened the door before I could knock. "I knew you'd come," she said with a smirk. "Your family seems to have trouble following simple instructions." I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm. "My daughter is a child. You have no right to yell at her." Karen crossed her arms. She was breaking the rule. "Kids can't play in the driveway. It's unsafe." I stared at her for a long moment. "Unsafe for who?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. "You enjoy this," I said finally. "You enjoy making people afraid." Her eyes narrowed. "Someone has to keep order around here," she snapped. I took a step forward. "You don't keep order by hurting people. You keep it by earning respect." She laughed. "Respect? You think this is about respect? It's about following the rules. If you can't do that, maybe you don't belong here." Her words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. I turned and walked away. I didn't say another word, but in my chest, something heavy had settled. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter, deeper. The feeling that something bad was coming, something I wouldn't be able to stop once it started. From that night on, I watched her differently. Every step she took past our house, every glance at my wife, every time she stood across the street pretending to be on her phone, I saw it. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was building control. Every fine, every complaint, every stare was part of it. And all I could think about was my daughter's voice, trembling as she asked, "Why does that lady hate me?" I didn't know the answer then, but I was going to find out, and when I did, Karen would wish she'd never started this war. The moment I heard the scream, everything inside me went still. My body reacted before my mind could. The door flew open, and I was already running, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out every sound except for my daughter's cries. The air smelled faintly of ozone, sharp and burned, and the sound of crackling electricity filled the air like a hiss from something alive. My wife was kneeling in front of our daughter, her arms wrapped around her, whispering something I couldn't hear. My little girl's face was twisted in fear, her small hands gripping her mother's shirt, and behind them stood Karen. Her hand was raised, the black taser still sparking, the light flashing across her face like a warning. She wasn't even sorry. She looked proud. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice breaking through the air like thunder. Karen turned slowly, her expression stiff and cold. "I warned you," she said. "Your child broke the rules again. I told you this would happen if you didn't start taking things seriously." The words didn't even make sense. My daughter was 7 years old. She was sitting on the lawn with her toys, laughing, not hurting anyone. I took a step forward, every muscle in my body tight. "You pointed a weapon at a child," I said, my voice low and shaking. "That's assault." She laughed softly, a dry, ugly sound that made my stomach twist. "It's a taser," she said, and I didn't touch her. Maybe now she'll finally learn some respect. My wife looked up at her, eyes red with tears. "Respect?" she said, her voice trembling. "You scared her half to death." Karen rolled her eyes. "You people are ridiculous. Everyone in this neighborhood knows you think the rules don't apply to you." I stepped closer. "Karen," I said quietly, "put the taser down." Her hand didn't move. She raised her chin, meeting my eyes like this was some kind of contest. "I have every right," she said. "This community has standards. If you can't follow them, maybe you don't belong here." My fists tightened. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, my breath coming short and heavy. "You think rules give you power," I said, "but you've gone too far." Karen's eyes flashed, and for a second she actually smiled. "Too far," she said. "You people have been ignoring me for months. You don't cut your grass on schedule, your child plays too loud, your wife talks to neighbors during quiet hours. Do you know how much work it takes to keep this community perfect?" My wife whispered, "You're insane." Karen's face twisted. "Don't call me that," she snapped. "You have no idea what I've done to make this place what it is." Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "I've kept it clean, peaceful, orderly. And people like you ruin it. You think you can just move in and change everything. Not here, not while I'm in charge." I took another step closer, slow and deliberate. The air between us felt heavy, like it could break. "You're not in charge anymore," I said. "Put it down." She took a step back, her grip tightening around the taser. "You don't scare me," she said, but I could hear it in her voice, the tiny crack where fear had started to slip through. Behind me, my wife stood up, still holding our daughter. "You need help," she said softly. "You can't keep doing this." Karen's eyes darted to her. "Don't talk to me like that," she said. "You think you're better than me because your husband wears a badge? Because you live in a bigger house? You think that makes you untouchable?" The taser crackled again. I could see the bright arcs of blue electricity flickering in her shaking hand. I could see the faint burn mark on the grass where she'd almost hit my daughter, and something inside me snapped. "Karen," I said, my voice dropping low, steady. "You made one mistake tonight. You thought you could threaten my family without consequence." Her eyes narrowed. "Or what?" she said. I took another step closer. "Or you'll find out exactly who I am." For a moment, silence. Then she laughed again, but it sounded forced. "Oh, please," she said. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" "Go ahead. I know the chief. He's a friend of mine." I stared at her. "Are you sure about that?" I said. Her smirk faltered. "Just slightly, but enough." I stepped forward one last time, close enough that she could see the badge clipped to my belt, the name engraved beneath it. Her face went pale. The taser dropped to her side. "You're the—" she started, her voice shaking. "Police chief," I finished for her. "And you just committed assault on a child." Her mouth opened, but she couldn't find the words. She looked around, like someone might come to help her. But the neighbors were standing outside now. Some had their phones up, recording. Some just watched in stunned silence. No one moved to defend her. My daughter whimpered softly in my wife's arms, and I looked back at her. She was still crying, her small hands gripping her mother's shirt. "It's okay," I said gently, my voice softening. "You're safe now." She nodded weakly, her eyes red. I turned back to Karen. She looked smaller now, like the power she'd wrapped herself in had started to slip away. The taser hung loosely in her hand. I pointed to it. "Drop it," I said. She hesitated, then let it fall. It hit the grass with a dull thud, the sound final. I stepped forward and picked it up carefully. "You've been terrorizing this neighborhood for months," I said. "You used your authority to scare people. But it ends tonight." Her lips trembled. "I didn't mean," she started. I cut her off. "You did. You meant every letter you sent, every fine you wrote, every threat you made. And now, you've crossed a line you can't take back." She stared at me, her face pale and blank. I could see it, the moment she realized everything was over. The flashing blue lights were already reflecting off the houses now, painting the quiet street in streaks of red and white. The sound of sirens grew closer, louder, echoing between the homes. Karen looked down at the taser lying in the grass, then up at me. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know." I stared at her for a long time. "Now you do," I said quietly. Then I turned to my wife, to my daughter, to the family she had tried to hurt. The sound of the approaching sirens grew louder, filling the air with the kind of justice that doesn't need words. The air went heavy, like the world had paused to watch. For a second, only the soft whimper of my daughter reached me, and the hiss of the taser fizzling in the grass was louder than anything else. Karen's face, a moment ago a mask of fury, turned into something thinner, smaller, like the paint peeling off a sign when the sun has burnt it for too long. Her eyes searched the street as if hoping a crowd would rise up and say it was all a joke. But the neighbors were already out, phones raised, faces open and stunned. No one laughed, no one moved to protect her. I made my steps slow and sure. Training taught me to use the moment between movement and action, to let the other person see every choice they had. She looked like she was trying to pick which lie to use first. Her lips moved, words stumbling out. It was a warning. I didn't touch her. She disrespected me. The sentences were thin. The truth would not be held together by thin things. A woman across the road shouted, "We called 911. Her voice carried, steady. Someone else said, "We have it all on video." And a ripple went through the small crowd, like a wind sliding across a field. People turned their phones toward Karen without shame. The recordings would not forget what she had done. Memory would not be hers alone. She backed away like a person trying to distance herself from a nightmare. "You can't film me," she snapped at the neighbors, her voice high and small. "This is private property." A man near the mailbox laughed, the sound rough. "She just pointed a weapon at a 7-year-old, he said. "You think private property matters here?" The words landed on Karen like stones. I stepped closer until I could see the tremor at the edge of her hands. "Listen to me," I said, low and steady. "You made a terrible choice. You attacked a child. You should be ashamed." She flinched as if my calm had an edge. For a moment she seemed about to speak, maybe to explain, maybe to deny, but then she flinched again and looked at her own shaking fingers. My daughter leaned into my wife's chest, eyes red but fierce even through the tears. She was small and brave, a little human with scraped knees and a stubborn heart. I crouched down so I could be level with her, the world narrowing to the warmth of her hand in mine. "You did nothing wrong," I told her. "You listened to Mommy. You were careful. Daddy's here." Her hand squeezed mine, tight enough to hurt, and that grip was all the answer I needed. Blue lights blinked at the end of the street, then red, then 2 cars breathing their way toward us. The sirens were not the thin, distant noise I hear in movies. They were real, angry, and close. A uniformed officer stepped from his cruiser and began to move toward us. Relief hit me like cold water. The job of strangers turning into helpers. The crowd shifted into witnesses. Karen made one last attempt. She raised her chin and barked, "You don't know who you're messing with." Her voice trembled with a pride that was already cracking. "I could sue you. I could call the board. I have standing here. Her words dissolved into the air when the officer reached us. He took in the situation with quick, efficient glances. He noted the taser on the ground. He noted the small handprints and the teary face. He checked our daughter's arm for marks, asked questions with a practiced softness. "Is she hurt?" he asked, turning to my wife. "She's shaken," my wife said, "but she'll be fine. She needs to be checked by a doctor." The officer nodded and called for medical to be on scene. Another officer talked to the neighbors, taking names, collecting phone numbers, asking who had recorded what. Evidence was being made of things Karen had hoped to hide. the bright arrogance in her glare, was meeting the slow machinery of law. Karen's bravado evaporated under the steady gaze of the uniformed officers. She attempted a story about discipline and community standards, but the words were wet paper against the steel of witness accounts and videos. Someone read the faint bruise on my daughter's arm where the taser's spark had kissed her. The paramedics would note it down. She had been frightened enough to fall. That alone was enough. An officer knelt to speak to our daughter carefully, asking simple things in a voice that sounded like someone who had practiced comfort. "What happened?" he asked. She answered in small sentences, the kind you give when you are still making sense of fear. Lady yelled, "Light hurt. Mommy grabbed me. It was enough." They asked Karen to step aside. She gaped, disoriented, and then began to argue louder. "This is outrageous. I have rights," she cried. "But rights do not mean license to harm." The officer read her the article of law about assault, the rights of a child, the danger of using a weapon, and the thin trail of her own handwriting on the complaints she had filed in the past. He listened to her protests, but he was filling in the notebook, writing down the times and the statements. She clutched the burned edges of her dignity and slowly put her hands together as the officer explained what would happen next. People who had lived under her rules came forward, hushed and ashamed. "She did this before," one woman whispered. "She tried to scare my son away from the park last month." Another man showed a string of text messages where Karen had threatened fines for imagined offenses. The evidence piled up in the officer's book like a small, growing hill. What had seemed like control turned into a paper tower of small cruelties. Each page made the house of her power unstable. Part of me wanted to do more. Old instincts, the ones that had trained me to move and take, thrummed beneath my skin. But the training also taught patience. There are battles you win with force, and battles you win with proof. I watched the officers move like they were building a case, gathering, steady, and precise. They interviewed my wife and me, took our statements, asked about past incidents, asked if Karen had targeted us before. My wife told them everything she could remember, voice steady as it shook. She told them about the letters, the fines, the way Karen hovered like a dark cloud. She handed over copies of notices, dates, times, and the officer's face turned from professional to something close to sympathy. They took Karen's taser and logged it as evidence. An officer read parts of the statement back to her. She tried to explain, to plead, but the neighbors' videos had frozen the moment in time. There was no room left for the small lies that had once controlled the street. The ambulance arrived, and a paramedic checked my daughter closely. They put a cool cloth on her forehead, checked her pulse, and then sat us down to explain the simple next steps. "She'll be fine," they said. "We'll do a quick check at the ER just to make sure there's no internal issue from the shock, and then it will be about rest, quiet, and reassurance." Those last two things felt like a miracle. Later, as Karen was placed in the cruiser and read the rights, she looked at me for a long, shamed second. Her face had changed into a map of regret and disbelief. She mouthed words I couldn't make out. I felt anger, yes, a hard, hot thing, but beneath it there was also a cold satisfaction. Truth had shown itself, and the small, petty power she'd built from fear had finally cracked. My daughter curled into my arms on the pavement, her chin tucked against my chest. She was exhausted more than anything. Fear drains you like a thief. I rocked her slowly, feeling the hum of her breath come back to calm. Around us, neighbors spoke in quiet tones, offering blankets, soft apologies, and offers to watch the kids for a while. The community that had been quiet from fear was waking up, faces open now, no longer folded into the husk of her domination. The officers thanked us for patience and for the evidence. They promised to follow through. "We'll take it from here," one said. "We'll make sure she can't do this to anyone else." I wanted to believe him with every fiber in me. Right then, standing in the glow of porch lights and police lamps, I felt the shape of something like hope. When the dust settled, and the last siren faded, I sat on the front step with my daughter asleep against my shoulder, and I looked at the street where Karen had stood, once proud and loud. The power she had tried to hold was gone. In its place was a quiet that meant something different this time, not the silence of fear, but the calm of a neighborhood that could breathe again. The air pulsed with blue and red light, as the police cars settled into place along the curb. Neighbors stayed on their lawns, hushed, phones still in hand, their screens catching the glow of the sirens. Karen stood near the center of it all, shoulders tight, her mouth twisting into something between a sneer and disbelief. She had ruled this street for so long that even now, surrounded by officers, she looked as though she couldn't quite believe her authority was gone. The sound of a radio crackled from one of the cruisers, the distant voice of dispatch fading under the weight of her shouting. "You don't understand," she barked at the nearest officer. "I was protecting community standards. There are rules here, rules everyone agrees to when they move in. She disobeyed them, and She gestured wildly toward my daughter, still in my wife's arms, trembling but awake. "I didn't hurt her. I only meant to scare her, that's all." The officer, a tall man with calm eyes, wrote something in his notebook before looking up. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you discharged a weapon designed to deliver an electric current toward a minor. That's not a warning, that's assault." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her fingers twitched at her sides, restless. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke again. "She touched my flowers," she said, almost to herself. "They weren't supposed to be touched." The officer didn't answer. Another uniformed officer approached. A young woman with a soft but firm tone, and guided Karen's hands gently behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs was clean and sharp. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my daughter's quiet sobs filled the silence again, the small sound of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world could be so cruel. I stepped closer to the officers. "She's scared," I said, nodding toward my daughter. "She doesn't understand what just happened." The woman officer looked at me and nodded. "We'll make sure she's okay," she said. "She's safe now." Karen began to thrash, her voice rising again. "This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me. I'm on the HOA board. I've kept this place together for years. Ask anyone here, ask them." Her words carried across the street, but no one moved to defend her. The same neighbors she'd fined and frightened stood still, some shaking their heads, others looking away. The silence was louder than any verdict. One of the neighbors, an older man who had lived across from her for years, finally spoke. "Karen," he said, "you went too far this time." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "We warned you to stop, you never listened." Her face changed then. The fury cracked, and for a moment she looked small, just a person who'd built a throne out of control and now had nothing to sit on. Her eyes darted to me, searching for something, maybe pity, maybe understanding. I didn't look away, but I didn't move toward her either. The officer guided her toward the car. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, reciting the familiar words. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." She shook her head violently. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You don't know who I am." The officer didn't pause. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you." As she reached the car, she turned her head sharply toward me. "You'll regret this," she shouted, her voice high and ragged. "You think this is over, but it isn't." The door closed before she could finish. I took a deep breath, the kind that tries to pull the world back into your lungs after you've been holding it too long. The air was cool now, the tension finally breaking under the hum of police radios and murmured conversation. My wife stood beside me, still holding our daughter, her hand trembling where it rested on our child's back. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked quietly. The paramedic nodded. "She's shaken," he said, "but she'll be all right. Just rest and keep her close tonight." He smiled gently at my daughter. "You're very brave, you know that?" She didn't speak, but she managed a small nod, her thumb still tucked against the hem of her mother's sleeve. One of the officers came over to take my statement. He wrote down every word, asking questions slowly, carefully, making sure the timeline was exact. I gave him the same steady tone I used in every report I'd ever written, but my voice felt heavier this time. "She aimed at my daughter," I said. "She activated the device. The child fell. My wife reached her first. I disarmed her." The officer nodded, writing it down. "You said you're law enforcement yourself?" he asked. I nodded. "Police chief," I said quietly. "Special investigations." His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't comment. The paramedics finished checking our daughter, then packed their equipment. The officers started dispersing the crowd. asking people to go back to their homes. A few neighbors lingered, offering quiet words of support. "We didn't know it would come to this," one woman said softly. "She's been getting worse for months." Another man added, "She fined me for leaving my truck in the driveway last week. I didn't think she'd ever do something like this." I nodded, offering small reassurances. I barely believed myself. When the last of the lights dimmed and the officers began loading their equipment, Karen sat in the back of the cruiser, silent now. Her reflection in the car window caught the flash of blue and red lights, distorting her expression into something ghostly. She wasn't yelling anymore. She just stared forward, jaw tight, eyes wet but unblinking. Maybe she was realizing that control built on fear can only last so long before it collapses under its own weight. The officer in charge approached me one last time. "We'll handle it from here, sir," he said. "There'll be charges, probably assault, possibly child endangerment, and misuse of a weapon. We'll contact you for statements." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. When the car pulled away, the sound of the tires against the asphalt was the only noise. My daughter looked up at me, her eyes big and tired. "Is the bad lady gone?" she asked softly. I crouched down and brushed her hair away from her face. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "She's gone." My wife stood beside me, her eyes glistening under the streetlights. "I can't believe she actually did it," she whispered. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "People like her always think they're untouchable," I said, "until they find out they're not." As we walked back to the house, the quiet returned to the street. The porch lights flickered gently, one by one, as neighbors retreated indoors. The faint smell of burned grass still hung in the air from where the taser had sparked. My daughter clung to my neck as I carried her inside, her head resting against my shoulder. The door closed softly behind us, shutting out the noise, the lights, and the tension. I looked around at the house we'd built, at the walls that had always been our safe place, and I promised myself it would stay that way. Whatever fear Karen had planted in this neighborhood was done now. I looked at my wife, still pale, still shaken, and I said quietly, "It's over." She nodded, but her eyes said what words couldn't. Maybe it wasn't over yet, not completely, but for tonight, our family was safe, and for the first time in months, the house felt quiet in a way that didn't make my skin crawl. Outside, the night settled again, calm and slow, like a deep breath after a long storm. And somewhere down the road, in the back of a police car, the woman who had thought she owned the neighborhood sat staring at her reflection, wondering how she had lost everything she thought was hers. The sun came up quiet the next morning, softer than it had in weeks. The neighborhood that once buzzed with Karen's complaints and threats now felt still, almost gentle. No more letters in mailboxes, no more fines taped to doors. The silence felt like peace, not fear. My wife stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee, the steam curling into the morning light. She hadn't said much since that night. Her voice still carried the tremble of what we'd lived through, but her eyes were different now, calm, steady, unafraid. My daughter sat on the living room floor with her stuffed bunny, humming quietly to herself as if the world had been reset and everything broken had finally started to mend. I stepped outside barefoot, the dew cool against my feet. The same street that had seen sirens, shouting and flashing lights now looked like any other peaceful morning. Birds were singing again. Neighbors waved instead of hiding behind curtains. Some came over to say thank you, their faces still marked by months of stress but now carrying relief. The man from across the street, the one who had once whispered complaints about Karen, walked over with his hands in his pockets. "You did the right thing," he said. "We were all too scared to stop her." I nodded. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "doing the right thing means standing up when no one else will." He looked at me for a long second, then said, "You made this place safe again." Later that day, an official letter arrived. The HOA board had met and voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position as president. The document was short, formal, and final. It cited abuse of authority, harassment of residents, and criminal activity. At the bottom, a signature from the new acting chairperson, a neighbor I actually trusted. I handed the letter to my wife. She read it twice, then let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "It's really over," she said softly. "It's finally over." But the truth was, Peace doesn't come back all at once. It trickles in slowly, like light finding its way through closed blinds. That evening, my daughter asked if she could go outside to play. The last time she had stood on that lawn, she'd been crying. Now she looked at me with hesitant hope. I smiled and said, "Go ahead, sweetheart." She ran to the grass, her pink ball bouncing in front of her, laughter returning like music we hadn't heard in too long. My wife stood next to me on the porch, watching her, the setting sun painting the sky orange and gold. "She's not afraid anymore," my wife whispered. "Neither are we," I replied. Over the next few days, the change spread through the neighborhood. People started talking again, gathering on lawns, kids riding bikes without worrying about violations. The air felt lighter, like someone had opened all the windows at once. Even the flowers Karen had been so protective of began to wilt, almost poetic, a final symbol of control losing its grip. The new HOA head sent out a letter apologizing for everything that had happened. They promised reforms, new elections, and a full review of how power was handled. The words were formal, but they meant something. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was healing. One afternoon, a police officer stopped by, the same one who had arrested Karen. He handed me a folder. "Case is closed," he said. "She's facing multiple charges: assault, harassment, and endangerment of a minor. Looks like she's taking a plea deal." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. He gave me a small smile. "You've got a strong family," he said. "Most people would have lost control in a moment like that." I looked at my wife, then at the window where our daughter was playing with her toys. "I've seen enough violence to know when to use it and when not to," I said quietly. "But when someone threatens your family, you don't need training to know what to do." The officer nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did good," he said before walking back to his car. That night, after dinner, the house was filled with the kind of quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. My daughter had fallen asleep early, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, the faintest smile on her lips. My wife was sitting on the couch, reading, her hair loose around her shoulders. I sat beside her, the warmth of her presence grounding me. "You think she'll remember any of it?" my wife asked softly. I shook my head. "Not the bad parts," I said, "but she'll remember that we kept her safe. That's what matters." She nodded and leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. "You would have done exactly what I did," I said. "You protect the people you love. Always." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain. I stepped onto the porch again, the same spot where everything had started. The lawn was clean, the grass soft under the moonlight. I could still see the faint burn mark where the taser had hit, a small scar on the ground that mirrored the one left in our lives. But scars aren't always ugly. Sometimes they remind you that you survived. I stood there for a while, listening to the crickets, the soft hum of the world moving on. A car passed slowly down the street, headlights gliding over the houses before disappearing around the corner. I watched it go, then looked back at the house, our home. Inside, my wife and daughter were safe. The lights were warm, the shadows calm. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about what might go wrong. I was just grateful. Before going back inside, I looked at the sky, the stars barely visible through the haze. "It's over," I said under my breath. "It's really over." I turned back toward the door, hearing my daughter's soft laugh in her sleep through the open window. That sound, pure, small, and unbroken, was the proof that we had won. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of control anymore. It was the peace of freedom. People waved when they passed, kids played again, and when my daughter ran across the yard, sunlight catching her hair, I thought to myself that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's just about making the world safe again for the people who deserve better. Karen was gone. The rules had changed. And for the first time since we'd moved here, our home finally felt like home.